Every early Lotus car I've ever worked on has the same ugly problem: burnt, melted, or completely cooked wires. And there's a reason for that. These charging and starting circuits were barely good enough when the cars were new. And the minute you change alternators or upgrade anything, the whole system gets pushed past its limits. So today, I'm rebuilding the electrical backbone for this Europa. We're starting with the alternator, the starting circuits, the temperature sending, and we're sizing everything the right way using the 3% voltage drop rule. I'll tell you more about that in the video. Now, I'll be honest, some of this works a little slow. It's not flashy, but on this channel, we show everything, not just the Instagram moments. So this is the real work that keeps these cars from burning harnesses and leaving you stranded. Well, we're going to show you today how to build a system that's going to hold up to all the amperage that you're pulling from your different circuits. So let's get into it. Well, I gotta say, we're at a tricky part of the build. Not because things are hard at this stage, but because the body is still in the paint shop and I'm trying to get as ready as I can and prepared as I can to have the chassis ready for the body to go back on. So I've got a lot of systems to give attention to. I need to finish the wiring on the distributor and the general wiring around the engine. You know, I want to run the charge cable from the alternator to the starter. It's a new alternator. It's not a stock alternator. And that's one of the things I'm faced with. There's not much left on the car that was stock. So I'm finding that a lot of the methods of build that were used on the original Lotus Europa, I've changed things just enough that the original brackets aren't working for me. For example, I have a new master cylinder that we're going to be looking at pretty soon, and it mounts on the front of the car. It was not available in the vertical bolt hole mounting pattern, so I had to create a bracket for that from scratch, and that makes the master stick out just a little bit farther. So the push rod that goes through the front T section of the chassis was too short, so I had to machine a new push rod that was about 1 inch longer. So it's a lot of little things like that. I've also got a problem with the shift linkage. When I put the shift linkage in on its original mounting location, it doesn't want to seem to operate correctly. And then the clutch cable interferes with the exhaust manifold. It's an aftermarket header that's on there. It came with the car. I just had it ceramic coated, but that clutch cable is interfering with the exhaust manifold. So I need to come up with a fix for that as well. I'm relocating the battery for this car up to the front. It'll help with a little bit of the weight distribution. But when I do that, I'm completely changing the wiring. So I've got to up the gauge of the battery cables from what they were originally. Since I'm running, you know, I'll probably have, I don't know, 10-ish feet of battery cables. So I've got to go with a 1 gauge or 0 gauge AWG battery cables to run those back. And the alternator is a 100 amp alternator now. It's not a stock alternator, so the connections on the back are a little bit different. I can't use a standard Lotus plug that was made for these because it can't really, the cables that were made to go into that stock plug can't handle 100 amps. They would get too hot and they would melt. So I've got to rethink that whole configuration. So, you know, I've got to do the math and make sure that my wire gauges that I'm using for everything are up to current standards. So just a lot of little things, a lot of changes, a lot of fabrication, and I just need to start knocking it out. It's hard to know where to start with all these systems, and you're also making guesses because you don't have the body, and some of the measurements I need to take and the routings I need to take with these cables, the body affects that. So I'm doing the best I can. So we're going to be knocking these punch list items out one by one. Today's a great day for it. It's sunny out here. It's like 60 degrees, and maybe it'll warm up a little bit more. I don't know. I hope it does. We're going to start with getting the alternator hooked up and getting the pulley back on the camshaft. I looked into getting an aftermarket pulley for the alternator, and if you can a couple guys sell them, right? They're made out of billet aluminum, they're machined, they're beautiful looking, but they're really expensive. They're like excess of $200, and you know, I just didn't want to do that. So I actually took the old pulley and I machined some holes all the way around that to reduce the weight and also give it a little better look. Let me show you that. All right, so back here, this is the new alternator, and like I said, it's at 100 amp alternator. I don't think I'll ever need to pull 100 amps. It may only, on an average run, be pulling 40, 50 amps, maybe 60 amps, something like that. But I upgraded nonetheless because I'm going to be doing some different things, and I want to have the option to include more electronics in the future if I want to. Like I said, it has the standard plug here for an alternator, but I don't want to use that, so I'm going to be running my cables here. This is the B+ terminal, so I'm going to be attaching my lead to the starter right here, and probably not use any, well, I will have to use this IND terminal. I believe that's the exciter terminal, so the alternator needs to see some current before it starts to charge, and that's what that's for. Oh, but here's the alternator pulley. This is the stock pulley. All I did was machine in 4 concentric circles here, so I kept the balance of the wheel as it turns. That's all good. And this was incredibly tight on the camshaft. It was too tight. I mean, I know it's supposed to be an interference fit, but this sucker was really tight. So I machined out just a little bit, so it still won't go on like this. But if I heat it up, I think it'll slide right on. Woodruff keys over here, that's the keyway. So I'm gonna go ahead and heat this up now with propane torch and see if I can slide it on the camshaft, and we'll get this belt on it and we'll start to finalize this whole charging system back. Actually, because I drilled those holes in the pulley, I had to paint that so it didn't rust. So I gave it some quick spray paint so that while that's drying, I want to talk about the cable. So we are going to run 6-gauge cable from the alternator to the starter. And you got to get this, it's AWG cable. What you don't want, if you go on Amazon, you can find 6-gauge cable, but a lot of it is the CCA cable, which is made for audio equipment. You don't want that. That has aluminum in it, and it's not 100% copper. You want to make sure you get battery cable, which is 100% copper strands. So this is the right stuff to use. Because I love nerding out on this stuff, here's the calculations behind sizing this wire. So I'm running from the alternator to the starter, and I'm using a 6-gauge wire. Well, why did I choose 6-gauge? It's bigger than what Lotus used, but they were running a different alternator, a lower amperage alternator, so I needed to beef up my gauge wire for the potential 100 amps that this can push out. Okay, so sizing it. The rule of thumb is you want to go, your voltage loss you want to be no more than 3% of the voltage in the system. So in this case, if the alternator is charging, it's going to put out 14 volts, let's say. So 3% of 14 volts is 0.42 volts. So we do not want a voltage loss greater than 0.42. So we take a 6-gauge wire, for instance, and we're going to use the same equation, V equals IR, voltage equals the amperage times the resistance. So for this particular wire, my loss is 0.00, or my resistance is 0.000395 ohms per foot resistance. So I'm running 3 feet of cable, but I also want to include the return circuit, which I'm going to say is 3 feet as well. So let's just say I'm using 6 feet. So 6 times that resistance gives me 0.00237. My maximum amperage is 100, so V equals IR. I multiply the 0.00237 times 100, and I get 0.237 volts. So I get the 0.237 volts, which is less than the allowable 0.42. Remember, 3% of the voltage in the system. So at 0.237, less than 0.42, that's cool. What does that mean? All right, let's talk about the power, the wattage that this cable is going to give out. Running 6 gauge, it'll produce 23, or it's going to lose 23.7 watts. So that's heat. That's heat that's going to dissipate in the cabin. If I run the same numbers, for instance, with an 8 gauge, so a little bit smaller, that power goes from 23.7 watts up to 37 watts. So what does that mean? That means that that cable is going to run a lot hotter. That's why cables melt, because they have too much amperage and it exceeds the capabilities of that particular wire. So in this case, the 6 gauge works out. We did the math, we're good to go. So we know we're not going to have any issues with this down the road. Had I put the original wiring harness back on, no good. Too many amps coming out of this alternator, potentially. All right? So what I'm going to do now is just put a ring terminal here and a ring terminal down there, decide how I want to route this, and we'll get this cable hooked up to the starter. Oh, one note. You know, you'll notice that this cable is going to be a lot smaller than the battery cables that run from the battery to the starter. The reason why is you have cranking amps when you start the car. Cranking amps can be up to 230 amps, way exceeds the 100 amps of the alternator, but the alternator never sees that. Even though this is connected to the battery cable at the starter, this alternator never sees more than, the most it can ever see is 100 amps, and it's not even going to see that. That's worst case scenario. So that's why this cable that goes from the alternator down to the starter is always a little bit smaller than the battery cables from the battery to the starter and the ground cables and the other cables. It's all determined by the amount of amperage that that particular cable is going to have to carry to do its job. So let's put some ring terminals on this. So I cut the cable to length. I just used a utility knife to take the insulation off the copper wire here. I've got my terminal. I do have a heat shrink sleeve. I'm going to put that on first. So I don't have any fancy equipment to make these crimps. I've got this old school way of doing it, but it works. So I just put this in there. And then good old hammer. And that gives me actually a really good strong crimp. It works really well. So I'm going to slide the heat shrink down. I'm going to go use a heat gun and shrink that on there, and then I'll do the other side. Okay, I got my cable made. Hey, one little thing. This may or may not make sense. So these cables don't like to twist a whole lot. So before I put my terminals on, I'll put one terminal on, and then I'll run the wire and see how it wants to lay relative to the other terminal, and just mark it so I know to orientate this fitting here such that it wants to fall directly on the post and I don't have to twist the wire to get it on. So I try to eliminate the twist as much as I can. So we're just doing this temporarily right now. We're going to loosely run everything, see how we look. I'm going to install some insulated cable clamps along here to hide this wiring harness. Come down and attach to that starter. That's going to look good. Yeah, it's a nice routing. So let's go see if that paint is dried, and let's put this pulley on and start to button this up. All right, quick note on the bolt in the camshaft. These are just like the Lotus Esprit camshafts. There's a Allen head in there that closes that oil gallery. When they manufactured camshafts, they would drill this all the way through the cam, and then they threaded a section here and they cap it off with an Allen or a set screw in there. So those can leak oil. So what I want to do is put some sealant on here and seal this up so we don't get any oil leaks in this location. There we go. Now we'll torque that to spec. Here we go. Great, so we got the pulley on. I see just a little bit of sealant coming out. That's perfect. That's what I was looking for. And now we're going to go ahead and just tighten up the alternator. So I've got two fastening locations. There is I actually used a bolt here, not a stud, going all the way through. I think it's 5/16. So I've got a lock nut on this side, got washers. And then over here, this actually threads into the alternator, so there's no nut. So we'll put some tension on this and lock it down. There, that looks good. Okay, next wire to run is the exciter wire that goes in the IND terminal right here. That's going to run up to the dash with a warning light for the ignition. So you turn the ignition on, lights up. As you crank the car, that's going to provide voltage to the alternator to turn the alternator on, and then that light on the dash goes off. Same circuit as in the Esprit. So this circuit's only carrying about 0.1 to 0.25 amps. So because the amperage is so low, I'm just going to run an 18 gauge wire on this all the way up to the gauge, and my voltage drop on that, or my losses, are going to be insignificant. So we'll go with 18 gauge for this wire here. All right, so I got a brown 18 gauge wire here connected to the IND terminal on the alternator. That's going to run up to a warning light on the dashboard, and that's it. That's all the wiring I need for this alternator now. All the other stuff Lotus had on here, they were doing some different things, sharing current with different circuits, and this is going to be wired much differently. So we're going to keep moving on, but right now that's all we need, and I've got to make sure I cut this at the right length. So I'm going to run it up to the front of the car, make sure I've got excess, and that's it for the wiring on the alternator. Okay, well, they're just loosely in there, but you get the idea. So that cable's going to run along there, and I might have to, maybe I'll do the reverse light cable through that harness as well. Not sure yet, but hey, we're making progress slowly but surely. All right, back to the starter. So I need a trigger wire. I'm using 14 gauge AWG. Going to need this when we start the engine on the run stand too. Trying to think of the best way to mount it. That motor mount is just right in the way. So this will come up and enter the wiring harness right here. And then it's going to run up to the ignition. So make sure I have enough wire. All right, we're jumping over this side. We're going to wire up the temperature sending unit. That's 18 gauge, got a green wire. I've already put a terminal on it with heat shrink. Just need to think about how I want to run this wiring. I can either go around the engine that way or this way. This way is a shorter path to get into that wiring harness, but it would have to run against the bulkhead. But that's okay because I need to wire up the fuel sending unit as well, which will be over here. And maybe I can put some P-clips, screw them into the bulkhead, and run that harness through the bulkhead, tie it into the rest of the harness, and then through the bulkhead into the car. So I'll leave enough wire to do that. Okay, left myself plenty of wire. That's good. I could have used a flag terminal on there. That would have worked better. Would have been a little cleaner. I might change that to a flag terminal. We'll see. Alright, so that's done. Alternator's done. What am I missing? Gas tank will be here. Of course, you got all the tail lights. Those are all going to run on that side of the car, so none of that will be here. What else is here? I'm trying to think. Gas tanks, sending unit. Huh. Fuel pump's going to be over there. I don't know. It's all I can think of right now. Oh, cool. Well, we'll leave that there. I think I've got most of the wiring in place to run the engine now. Well, that was it for today. You know, it's a realistic build. Sometimes there's just a lot of little things you got going on. You just got to knock them out. And I feel like I'm in the middle of that right now. But this is the gauge stand that I'm going to use to start the engine. Maybe we'll do that next episode. I don't know. Fingers crossed. I got some things to get done before then. But we're very, very close. You know, it's got the gas tank, it's got the fuel pump, it's got ignition on here. It's got everything I need to run the engine. These are the gauges from the car. So we'll be going over that as well. And God, I really hope to get this thing started next episode. So until then, hey, thank you very much for watching. I do really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. All right? All right. See ya.